Hello, Garland Nixon here with Jody Brower again. We've got farmers in the street all over the EU throwing manure and just general anger. Let's talk. Garland Nixon back. And I can always tell, being a person who's somewhat OCD myself, I can always tell the OCD viewers because they're the ones who are like, that 30-second countdown thing drives me crazy. And I'm like, man, I do an hour program and I'm like, oh, that's right. I'm OCD too. That's the kind of thing that's going to freak you out. That the 30 seconds, not the other hour. But at any rate, okay, so let's go. Jody Brower is the vice chair of the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist, and there's a lot of things to talk about in the EU right now. And one of the issues, Lenin wrote a book called The State and Revolution. And Jody and I have discussed it. And one of the things that stuck in my head about that was the concept of the ruling elite creating the dynamics in which revolution becomes inevitable. Let's talk about what's going on in the EU right now with the farmers in the street and general anger, but it's there's a general anger and fury, I can imagine, but it's manifesting itself in the forms particularly of the farmers, and these are the people who grow food. Your thoughts on what's going on there in relation to through the lens of Lenin's discussion about the state creating the dynamics for revolution?
Well, Lenin, of course, was a great student of Marx, and it was Marx who pointed out right from the beginnings of his writings in the Communist Manifesto, he said, the one thing the capitalist system produces more than anything else is its own gravediggers, by which he meant the working class. The working class historically has the mission of getting rid of, destroying capitalism and replacing it with socialism. And capitalism can't do without workers. If it could, it would, but it can't. And in producing the working class, it's also producing the force that's going to end its rule. So that comes from Marx originally, and it's a basic kind of underlay of the understanding of Marxism of the world. When you said about, the elites create the conditions in which the masses rebel, I think we need to slightly reframe that and say the elites are trying to manage the situation. It's their system which has created the conditions under which the masses rebel, and they can't stop it creating those conditions. The thing to understand about capitalism and capitalists is capitalists can't control the way that capital behaves. Essentially, they can't control how the contradictions of producing things for profit manifest in the world. They can't control the fact that it creates this massive inequality. They can't control the fact it creates overproduction crises, which lead to massive anger on the part of the working class, because, of course, they end up suffering. They end up poor, they end up without work, they end up bankrupt, they end up on the streets, they end up with starving children, homeless. This is the result of capitalist crisis. And the capitalists can't stop capitalism behaving this way. They're not in control at all. They're trying to manage, they're trying to ride the waves, of very bumpy waves of capitalist cyclical crises. And of course, once we get to global capitalism, imperialism, the crisis is no longer even cyclical. It's a bumpy downhill journey, right? And even the up is on a down, the up goes like this, they don't get real ups anymore at all, right? And certainly not the kind of up where the masses of the workers go, oh, times seem to be a bit better right now. You remember for the last 20 years, we've been being told that we're in a recovery. And every time the ruling class says we're in a recovery and they start making some profits at the shareholder end of things, the big corporates are making profits of some kind. And we're wondering, where are they coming from? Because the masses are having things worse and worse, right? So we can kind of see the dynamic there. Okay, the profits are coming from impoverishing the masses. There's no real boom in the sense that the last time we saw a real boom was at the end of World War II. What triggered that boom? Huge destruction of the means of production, a huge destruction of the wealth of the world, and huge destruction of people. And all of that created, number one, higher employment because there's just fewer people, right? Number two, huge demand for reconstruction and rebuilding all the things you've destroyed. Essentially, that's the only way capitalism now, monopoly capitalism, can find to reboot the economy. It's through huge, destruction of that type of scale. So workers have to ask themselves, is this the price we're willing to pay for some prosperity, that every few decades we have to destroy half the wealth of the planet and a huge proportion of the people of the planet so that we can put some demand back into the system? And by the way, in that process, we'll still be the ones on the bottom, right? Is that the price worth paying and that's what is called by the capitalists social stability, i.e. their system stays in place, right? So the system is what creates the conditions. The elites try to ride it. They try to pass the burden of the crisis onto the poor, which we see them doing. And they try to find a way to survive, to keep in profitability for their particular business not to go bust, for somebody else's business to go bust and not theirs, right? So the conditions that are causing so much unrest have come about because there's an overproduction crisis, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. And as the overproduction crisis gets worse and the capitalists find it more and more difficult to make profits, we're seeing two things. One is the drive to war, to conquer new markets, to outmaneuver competitors, to control and loot raw materials at cheaper prices so you can maximize your profits, right? The other, and to destroy things so that you can reboot the economy with arms spending and with construction where you rebuild what you destroyed. So that's one way that the ruling class tries to find its way out of the crisis. The other way is just to push down on the poor. Now, one of the ways that the poor are being, or the ordinary people are being pushed down on, is the steady removal of agricultural subsidies in Western Europe. Now, a lot of people never understood what those subsidies were about. When I was young, there was a lot of, we used to joke about, and there was occasionally kind of outrage about things like, you probably never heard of it, Garden, because you live in the States, but we used to joke about the European wine lake and the European butter mountain. And what were they? Those were manifestations of the fact that West European farmers were being paid to produce things there was no market for. So they would produce them, they would make a living, but they would end up really being destroyed, the stuff they were producing. But there was social peace because the peasants of Western Europe, I get told off for using that word, but it's just an old-fashioned word for farmer, right? The small producers of Western Europe were protected from the world market by subsidies. And that was very important because Britain was an exception. Britain, we long ago lost our small peasant class, and we've had big agribusiness dominating farming and agriculture in Britain for like more than 100 years. So it's not the same in Britain. In Britain, the EU subsidies were just bungs to big landlords, and they always looked kind of ridiculous. What's that about? In Western Europe, they were essential. They were a part of buying off the socialist revolution after World War II. So we've talked about this before, remember? After World War II, European imperialism was defeated, was on its knees, and every country in Western Europe, if it wasn't for the intervention of the USA, would have gone communist, right? So that was the situation in which we got the welfare state. We got our education, we got our healthcare, we got jobs, we got pensions, right? We got all these things that made us think that as workers, we could progress towards a better life inside conditions of capitalism. We didn't have to go through the messy business of making a revolution. Look, it's all going to be fine. Social democracy has your back, right? So we got the welfare state, and we allowed ourselves to be pacified. in Western Europe, a big important part of that was subsidies to farmers so that they would be guaranteed a living from their farming and not forced by the competition of the world market into bankruptcy. Now, if you look around the world at small farmers in India, in Africa, in all other parts of Asia, apart from China, what's happening to small farmers? They're all being forced into destitution and poverty. They can't compete against agribusiness. Of course they can't. That is the law of capitalism. Small businesses go down. And of course, small farmers in most countries are the smallest of small businesses. They're lots of subsistence farmers, right? They've got a little bit of land and they're just trying to feed their family and maybe have a tiny surplus they can sell in order to get other things they need, like that they don't make for themselves, right? So subsistence farming and small-scale farming was still very much a part of the economy of the Western European countries apart from Britain after World War II. And the subsidies to keep them afloat, rather than being forced into bankruptcy by the action of the world market, was a part of the social peace deal that imperialism made with its working class after World War II to keep social peace. Now what's happening, of course, is all the welfare state provisions, including the subsidies to small farmers, are being steadily undermined because there's a crisis in the system and the rulers are trying to pass the buck to the workers. They're also feeling that since the collapse of the Soviet Union, that socialism is not a threat to them anymore. The working class is no longer armed and organized with the Soviet Union to show it the way it was in 1945. So the combination of those things, the shifting balance of class forces and the pressure of the crisis, has pushed the ruling class to undermine step by step all of the gains, all of the bribes it paid to its workers, and that includes these subsidies. But on top of the steady erosion of these subsidies, which is forcing the margins down and down and down for small farmers in Western Europe, we have another problem, which is the inflation that's been caused by the system and been exacerbated by the economic war in Ukraine. And on top of that, especially the extra inflation on energy prices, which has been caused or exacerbated again by the war in Ukraine and by price gouging by the monopolies. So you put all of that together, and what were small margins have become, essentially unworkable numbers. And a whole raft of small farmers are finding themselves on the verge of bankruptcy, and probably even some quite big farmers who are just not agribusiness, right? I'm sure they're not all little subsistence farmers. I'm sure some of them are quite, would have thought 20 years ago they were quite prosperous, right? But their numbers have just been being pushed down and down and down until now they're like, well, actually, we can't work for this. We're making a loss when we try to produce anything. So of course they're angry and stressed, and nobody's been listening to them, because they're a marginal voice. And then they show their power, and they're giving a lesson to everybody, aren't they? Because suddenly everyone's remembering, oh, without farmers, you can't eat, right? Well, guess what? Without workers, nothing happens, right? This is an important lesson to the working class. We've got a huge power if we actually learn to use it. Look at what's happening in Gaza, for example. We have people on the streets. I'm going to be in London again tomorrow, another huge demonstration planned, to stop demanding our government to stop being complicit and stop the genocide in Gaza. But we actually should take a lesson from the French farmers or the Canadian dockers right now. There is a power in our hands that we are not using. It's not the power of marching up and down on a Saturday. It's the power of refusing to let these things carry on.
Wow. One of the things that popped into my head when you were talking, and that is the propensity for the ruling class, when they need to make adjustments, to push the burdens on the poor, to push the burdens on below them, so they can either, get some level of equilibrium, or at least appearance of that in their system, or that they can actually profit again, short sell, right? They're going to profit when things are going good, and when things go bad, hey, we can profit off of that too. Why do I say that? That's what's happening to Europe from one perspective. The US now, the US empire, right? So US imperialism looks around the ruling class of the empire. I see, we can discuss whether there's what the actual role of the European countries are in or colonies, whatever you want to call them, in U.S. imperialism. But the bottom line is, U.S. imperialism looks and it says, "Oh my gosh, Russia's rising, China's rising, Iran's rising. All of these countries, North Korea is waking up. All of these countries, the lefties in Latin America, they're getting elected all over the place. We need to try to knock some of these down to size. We need to take action against China, Russia, whoever, but it's going to be economically painful." So what do they say? We're going to say to Europe, you take the pain. That's what it appears to me. Here's what we're going to do. You're going to stop getting cheap energy from Russia, and we're going to sell you our energy at 5 times the price, right? We want you to stop buying stuff from them, from Iran, from whoever. We'll direct you who to stop buying from, which means you can only buy from us now. And we're going to sell you everything. So now what I see is U.S. imperialism saying we're going to prey, like the animal that eats its young. We're going to try to rebuild a system where that's advantageous for us. Somebody's got to take a hit. It's going to be Europe. And that's manifesting itself in Europe losing all of its subsidies, things for the poor, things for the working class, right? Because they can't afford it anymore because they're paying the price for U.S. imperialism, trying to re-equalize their system. Your thoughts on that?
You're absolutely right that under capitalism, the big eats the small. There's only one language in capitalism, and that is force. Might is right. Big is right. Big beats small every time. And when there's a condition of crisis, when everybody's under threat of going under, of course, the bigger the enterprise, the more it uses its weight, its power to survive at the expense of others, to push its rivals out of business rather than go out of business itself. If somebody's got to go out of business, it better be you, not me, right? And of course, if you're bigger and stronger, you've got more power. And that's the way it works. That's why every time there's a crisis in the system, out the other side of the crisis, we see there's been a whole bunch of mergers and acquisitions, right? Capital has become bigger and smaller companies have gone by the wayside, been gobbled up somehow, or just gone bust. And it's the same even now we see with the imperialist powers. You're absolutely right. US imperialism since World War II has been the only imperialist power that really had that strength left to it to dominate the globe. And the other imperialists were resuscitated to the extent that they continued to exist as imperialist powers. They're still imperialist powers because the workers in their country still have a privileged level of existence compared to the rest of the world. And because if you look at how their economies work, okay, Germany still had a fair chunk of industry. It was kind of unusual in that respect. There were specific historical reasons why it was set up to look like an industrial success, partly because of being a competitor to East Germany, right? So there were reasons for nourishing German industry in the post-World War situation, right? But essentially, if you look at the economies of the West European countries, and particularly the old imperialist powers of Britain, France, Germany, what you'll see is a totally distorted economy in terms of how much of the wealth of the country comes in through the City of London or the Bourse in Paris, or I forget the names of the stock exchanges, but you understand what I'm saying, through the stock exchanges, which basically means as loot. Comes in as loot from the third world, and how much capital is exported to extract profits in the rest of the world and bring it back to the imperialist countries. And this is the way that these economies can be characterized. They are leech economies. They are parasitic economies on the rest of the world. And the wealth they enjoy is not wealth that their people have created. It's wealth that their financiers have sucked out of other parts of the world. So you can still characterize their economies this way, but they don't have the strength as individual powers that they had in the pre-World War I period. it's been steadily and then sharply declining, steadily between World War I and World War II, very sharply after World War II. And the imperialists of those countries have only been able to maintain their positions as looters of the world in coordination with the USA, as junior partners to the USA. So they are kind of in a bind, because if they want to survive as imperialists at all, the system has to be saved. For the system to be saved, you've got to cooperate with the USA, because if the USA goes down, they're all going down. So there's this kind of weird dichotomy between those very top imperialists in each country who definitely understand that they benefit from the alliance with the USA, and they're the ones who direct government policy, make no doubt about it. You can see it in Germany, you can see it in Britain. The interests that direct the very richest, biggest fortunes are aligned with the USA in each one of those countries, and they're directing the government. There's a big section of capitalists underneath that who just are not the biggest capitalists, who are going to be sent to the wall by this dynamic. Because, as you said, the crisis is affecting everybody, and it's affecting Europe more than the USA, because the USA is the biggest one, and it is in a position to pass a lot of the burden and the blowback onto its junior partners first, right? And that is the dynamic. The way that the big industrial or the big financiers in France, Germany, and Britain are prepared to take this shows you that their loyalty is not to their country in terms of the mass of the people who live there. It's to their ability to stay at the top of the pile in each country, and more importantly, to be able to continue to reap profit from, exploiting the world.
So one of the things that I find interesting is that through Operation whatever it was, Gladio or whatever, and through other machinations, U.S. imperialism has been able to really crush or drive underground socialism, the left in their particular countries and vassal states, and to create this liberal, neoliberal class, right? Ultra liberal fascist class is getting now, and pretend as though they're the left, right? To redefine the left. The left is now, if you're for, the whole rainbow flag stuff and all, don't get me wrong. I believe that every human being should have the same expectation of rights, okay? But through redefining, if you're for trans stuff or whatever like that, you're a vegan, you want an electric car, things like that, that now becomes the left. Whereas people like us who say, I always say this when people say, why do you call yourself the left? And I say, because I view politics through the lens of economic class. First and foremost, when you start talking politics, I talk about economic class. And if I hear someone saying, well, we should enact these policies, and they're the exact same policies as the neoliberals, I say, you're going in the wrong direction. Your thoughts on this? The people, the masses, are looking for populism of some type. But what's there? A right-wing group that'll say, oh, it's the immigrants' fault. It's, whatever. Well, what's your solution? Well, we need more deregulation. Well, that's exactly what the neoliberals want. That's exactly what the elite ruling class. We want less government, power. Well, they want less government power, right? My thought that there will be a resurgence of the left, that what they're going to do is there will be some right-wing populists per se coming to power. But when they come to power, people say, great, you're in power. What are your solutions? And when they figure out that their solutions are the exact same as the people there, only maybe some new and different scapegoats, they all have scapegoats, but they all have a different set of scapegoats somewhat, that at some point people will keep looking and there'll be some room for some revolutionary changes. Your thoughts?
Absolutely. Fundamentally, ever since the turn of the 20th century, it's become very clear to the capitalist class, and particularly to the imperialists who are in charge of, capitalism globally, that their enemy is the working class, and socialism in particular. Socialism means the death of their rule, and it's the thing they fear the most. They try to tell us all the time that socialism is dead, it's over, it's from the past. They make up all kinds of nonsense. But of course, socialism is the future, and socialism is the ideology of the working class, and it can't be killed while you have a working class, and you can't have capitalism without a working class. So socialism's not going anywhere. Socialism is the only way out of where we are. So the ruling class tries to put off the evil day by confusion. And essentially, back in World War I, what we found was that the period before World War I, when the imperialists had been happily looting the world, peacefully looting the world, i.e. not fighting with each other about how they looted the world, World War I was when they had a big smash up because they were starting to tread on each other's toes about who was entitled to what bit of the world, right? But in the period of the 1870s, 80s, 90s, 1900s, the imperialist powers were happily looting the world, suppressing the peoples, stealing their wealth in peace. And what that meant was that the socialist movements that had developed in Europe found themselves being quietly and steadily co-opted. It wasn't clear this had happened. They carried on talking, like saying Marxism, Marxism, Marxism. In 1912, 2 years before the outbreak of World War I, I am getting to your point.
No, take your time. There's no rush. We got another half hour.
In 1912, all the socialist parties of Europe had a conference in Switzerland, in Basel, and they all agreed there's a war coming, and it's going to be a war between imperialist powers about who gets what share of the loot. And when that war happens, we must explain to the workers, and in the run-up before the war as well, but once the war happens, we must explain to the workers, this is not your war. This is an unjust war for division of the loot of the world. We must turn our guns on our oppressors. We must use the opportunity of a war that they have created to overthrow their rule and go forward to socialism. What actually happened in 1914? With the honorable exception of the Bolsheviks and some Irish and Hungarian revolutionaries who were small and fairly marginal, people tend to forget them, the Bolsheviks were the only ones who stuck to the line that had been agreed on in 1912. What happened to all the other socialist parties was their leaders, within weeks, were being co-opted into bourgeois national unity governments in their countries, in Germany, in Britain, in France. They were voting for credits, subsidies to the arms companies. They were going out recruiting for the war, and they were pronouncing that the war was for defense of the fatherland. And they helped the imperialists to send millions of young men to their deaths, instead of doing what the Bolsheviks did, which was to explain to the workers, this is not your war. This carnage is because of imperialism. There's only one way out. We need socialism. We need a socialist revolution. And they took those armed and angry young men and turned them against the ruling class, and they created the Soviet Union because of that. Now, so you see the difference between what real socialists do and what the fake socialists do. Now, ever since then, the bourgeoisie, the ruling class, the capitalists have had a huge amount invested in funding and creating fake socialists and a fake progressive movement to distract, confuse, and mislead the workers, and to keep their energy and anger confined within safe limits within the system. And they've paid for that because they're imperialist powers, and they get a lot of money from looting the world. So they're able to bribe a section of the working class into believing that actually we've got it pretty good here. It's okay. And that section is the section from which the misleaders of the working class are taken. and they are put over the masses of the workers, and their job is to act as, Lenin described them as labor lieutenants of the ruling class. They act as controllers and co-managers of the system, in a way that the ruling class themselves couldn't do that. They need privileged workers to put in place. We see it also in modern times, something I like to call NGOization, the professionalization of our movement. And it turns into not a revolutionary struggle to change the system, but a job, a career in managing the system. Actually, you see it in the way that NGOs act in the third world, the way they'll go into communities, find people who are natural leaders and turn them into professional charity givers, right? They decapitate the leadership of these communities by professionalizing their natural leaders. And they do exactly the same thing to the working class. When someone shows a bit of initiative, a bit of energy, a bit of dedication and determination, they give them a job. They give them a clipboard, they give them a function, they give them a position, and they give them a place in a machinery. And very quickly, these people forget what they were doing it all for, and their job becomes just to keep the machine going. But the machine is a part of the capitalist status quo. So you were talking about how we have all this kind of fake demands that are being created in place of the real ones. Instead of talking about class and our relationship to how things are produced, what is produced, how is it produced, what's our relationship to production, that determines our economic class, that determines our status in our society. You're a wage slave or you're an owner of capital. How we relate to one another in production is really what's significant, and how we understand what our role is in society. This is being disappeared and replaced with fake controversies. We have kind of culture wars, and we have a replacement of real socialist demands. Sorry, someone's washing my window. We have a replacement of real socialist demands with fake bourgeois academic ones. So where there used to be an understanding in the working class that, for example, the women's question, the question of emancipation of working class women from the double burdens they have in a class society, can only come about by abolishing class society. Now we have this kind of bourgeois feminism has turned the women's question into one of equal rights inside capitalism. Have we got enough women CEOs? Are there enough women top earners? None of which touches the question, actually, of working class women's oppression. Doesn't come near it. But it becomes our kind of distraction demand, and then everybody's got to be a feminist. And the demands of the feminists are what? A combination of sexual liberty, like that is going to change your life. Burn your bra, whatever stupid things they used to say in the 70s. And, demanding that we have a woman president to go and kill and rampage around the world. And then that's liberty and freedom, right? So,
and I got to add one, and this is to me very obvious. To say to powerless people, you will be, and they love to use this word, empowered if you can choose your pronoun. Right? That you know what I mean? And I think that's where it is like people who are powerless in this system. So they're saying, you want power, I'm going to give you power. You can choose whether they'll call you he, her, they, them, whatever the case may be. And I let people like me laugh it off and roll around. It's like, oh my God. But in reality, it's pretty devious because it's giving the illusion of power to the working class. I have no power. Okay, let me tell you what power you have. You can tell people that they can call you anything you want, whether it applies in traditional vocabulary or not. And we will then join in to beat that person. The ruling elite will come in and help you punish that person, ostracize that person if they don't use your chosen pronoun. Now you feel like at least I have something. I can tell people what to call me, and the ruling elite will side with me and help me to punish this person and anyone who doesn't use the pronoun. And I think that's a way of creating the illusion of power for the working class when they actually still have none. What do you think?
Absolutely. It's a part of this huge distraction machine, isn't it? To distract you from the real causes of your anger and your misery, and point you at another worker to blame. Fundamentally, that's the main role of all of this distraction machinery, is to encourage workers to believe that it's other workers who are to blame for their problems, whether it's immigrants, men, brown people, white people, Muslims, Christians, Zion, it's anybody who's another worker is your enemy. And Hopal, I was listening to him the other day, and he did a quote from a early Russian Marxist called Plekhanov. And I can't remember exactly the quote, so I'll paraphrase it. But he was talking about how the more decadent and decaying and kind of lacking in anything positive to offer the world the system becomes, the more sublime, he said, did become the words of its representatives. So we've seen this in our lifetime, haven't we? The steady disconnect between the public discourse of our officials and media and the reality of what they do and what the system actually is like to live in, and this, like, telling people they've got, I mean, it's insulting, isn't it? Telling people who have less than nothing that you've got power because you can choose your pronoun. Now, of course, you can choose a pronoun, but you can't choose your biology. So it's the most ephemeral, stupid thing to offer people. Oh, you can tell yourself you're a boy, not a girl. Okay, now my life is fixed. All my pain is now gone. Right? What nonsense. The thing that's created the pain, the alienation, the lack of all the meaningful things that people need as they're developing, through their adolescence, that aren't there: social cohesion, a future, access to culture, to leisure, to nature, to science, to all of the great benefits of human civilization. They're cut off from completely. They're stuck on their own, under lockdown, with phones marketing at them saying, oh, you're feeling pain? Oh, well, change your body, change your pronoun, you're going to be fixed, right? Capitalism is brilliant at selling us things that it promises are going to fix our pain, the pain that capitalism created, right? The alienation that a broken society produces in human beings. We're told there's you can buy a product to fix it. But I'll tell you where the line ends when it comes to self-identification, Garland, and that's where financial matters begin, right? You cannot self-identify as a pensioner. I keep thinking I should try it, right? Could I take the government to court? What would they say to me? I'm identifying as a 65-year-old, and by the way, that means I'm eligible for my pension, and if you don't give it to me, you're anti-old, anti whatever it is I'm identifying as. I don't know what. Right. We haven't identified the word for that one yet, have we? Right. But it sounds ridiculous, but it's exactly the same, but it's something that affects the financial, it has financial implications. And because of that, there's no way there's going to be a campaign to protect the rights of people who want to identify as pensioners, right? So then you start to see just how much of a sideshow all of this is, and how much of actually it's abuse of people, the victims of the system who've been made, mentally ill by the operations of a broken and decaying society. They're being manipulated, being sold a pill, and then they're held up as something to hit other people over the head with, who've not been suckered in by this mass delusion, by the campaigns of the medical pharmaceutical industry to push products onto alienated young people and all the rest of it. I mean, it's really sickening. But, the need for the ruling class to find ways to break us into smaller and smaller and smaller groups in order to try to stay on top while life gets worse for everybody. I mean, that's the thing to understand. All of this is not happening accidentally. It's happening because the crisis of the system is getting deeper and deeper. And in order to stay in control as social turmoil develops, they have to have us fighting like rats in a sack. And that's, to me, that's the most important thing, is to step back from all of this and say, anything that's encouraging us to fight one another has to be stopped, right? We have to find ways out of the rats in a sack phenomenon so that we can unify, because actually that's the thing that our rulers are trying to stop us from doing. And once we understand that, you know, we're on the path then to success.
Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you about also is, and that's something we haven't discussed as much in this particular platform, and that is, I've spoken about the ruling class, the governments, et cetera, in Europe, how subservient they are to U.S. imperialism, and how they're working in concert with U.S. imperialism to impoverish and disempower their constituents, as it were. You've talked about the role of the government, the role of the state, what their job is, because people, I hear people saying that's not their job. They're supposed to look out for us. And I'm like, it kind of really is their job. Talk about the role of the government, the role of the state.
So if you read Lenin's State and Revolution, and of course he was just putting together and summing up really the Marxist teaching on the state in that wonderful pamphlet. And what becomes very clear is, when you look at it historically, the state is an institution which arises at a certain point in the development of human society when society divides into classes. As soon as you have classes, you have antagonistic interests. You have exploiters and exploited. And when you have exploiters and exploited in a society, you've got groups who are in permanent conflict with one another. So the state arises at this point in time in order to control what would otherwise be a permanent kind of warfare, to keep it under control, to maintain social peace, but in the interests of the dominant exploiting class, the powerful class, the class with property, the class of exploiters. So this is what the state is. This is how it arose. This is what its function is. It's not neutral. It's not even an arbiter, although it seems like it is. It portrays itself as a neutral arbiter that's above class conflict, but actually it's a machine in the hands of the dominant class. So it's a machine for the suppression of the majority of the people, at least up until we get to socialism. That's what it is. So in the slave-owning state, the feudal nobility state, and now the capitalist state, these are all states of an exploiting minority. And therefore you have a bigger and bigger machinery involved in this state, because you've got a smaller and smaller number of people in whose interest the state is actually run. And in order to keep this tiny minority in power, you need a massive machinery of repression. It's actually, it's kind of ironic. It's a kind of ironic, weird projection. Because we who live in imperialist countries have become used to a very powerful, very dystopian state machinery that interferes in so many aspects of our life and is very repressive. Actually, even while it's telling us democracy, democracy, freedom, democracy, it's a very repressive state machinery. And we're aware that there's this big machinery of coercion, repression, domination over us. When they want to scare us about communism, they tell us, oh, it's big bad brother. It's a terrible, big, scary, oppressive, repressive state machinery. And we buy all that BS because we understand that. That's not what a socialist state is like, but we are ready for that propaganda because our experience of a state machine is of the state machine of the imperialist exploiters, which is a very repressive machinery. So fundamentally, in answer to your question, the role of the state is to keep the status quo, keep the ruling class ruling and the working class under control.
And so now, I guess, because we're in times of desperation for U.S. imperialism, I mean, because generally it seems to me that a very critical part of their diabolical plan is to create the illusion of democracy, the illusion that the ruling elite, that their governments, that the state is working on behalf of the working class, of the masses, right? That's a critical part of what they do. Maintain the illusion that you're voting in people who are looking out for you and blah, blah, blah. It seems to me that in their time of desperation, the rise of China, and particularly more so than ever, the rise of China, because they tell everybody that socialism doesn't work and China's beating the crap out of them in every way, shape, or form. And it's very obvious that they seem to, I guess, in times of desperation, be casting aside the need for the illusion of democracy, the illusion of representation, the illusion that they're on their side. That seems to me less important because they're getting more brutal in their censorship, in their, as you know, arresting people on the street who push back, all of those kinds of things. The crackdown on the working class seems to be getting more pronounced. And my interpretation is it's because of desperation. Desperate times call for desperate measures. Your thoughts?
Yeah, fundamentally, democracy is the velvet glove of bourgeois dictatorship. And it's very effective up until a certain moment. And when it stops being effective, the ruling class is not, it's just a tactic, right, for maintaining its rule. It's not a principle. So if there comes a point where the velvet glove of democracy doesn't work, fine, we'll get rid of it and you get the iron fist. And, when and where and how that happens, depends on the situation. In general, what we've seen in the past is the velvet glove is thrown away when the ruling class is really fearing for its survival and is not able to hold the workers down through it's controlled democracy, isn't it? We'll talk about that in a second, but through apparently democratic means, it's not able to keep the working class down. Usually it feels under threat of a rising and revolutionary working class. Now, in Britain and the USA right now, you can't say that our rulers are feeling under threat from a rising revolutionary class, but you can see that they are aware of the seeds of that upsurge. And that, of course, the global balance of forces, the global upsurge against their power is very much on the rise. And that's having its effect domestically as well. And it's also being affected by, declining economic conditions like we were seeing, talking about with the farmers in Western Europe. So all these things are like straws. We don't have good, disciplined, solid, class-conscious, organization and leadership in Britain and America in the way that we did maybe in the 1930s. But there is growing anger and frustration, and there are many, 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 many little rivers that have the potential to come together of, so many sources of frustration, anger, cynicism, desperation, disgust, and just the steady forcing down of people's living standards. And so I think what we're seeing at the moment is the kind of tentative steps towards trying to stop a leadership forming for this mass of discontent. One of the important things to understand about the state is that when you have a state, it arrogates to itself a monopoly on the use of force. I think it was Engels talked about how the state really, the first manifestation of the state is that instead of the armed population, which is what you have in primitive societies, you have special bodies of armed men. They're trained, they're paid by the state, they're loyal to the state. They're the ones who are allowed to use violence on behalf of the state. Everybody else must be disarmed. And on the other hand, you've got this issue where we have this kind of democracy. We have to believe that the state is working for us. The problem is that the veneer of democracy, as you said, Garland, is wearing very thin right now. We've had decades of watching how the state and the leaders are impervious to reason and to the demands of the people. The anti-war movement of 20 years ago was a massive wake-up call for a lot of people in terms of how they saw how the hugest mobilization had no impact on government decisions. And they said, oh, that's our democracy, is it? And then we saw during the process of that war how the lies we were told, and people in general tended to believe there must be something in those lies, right? About weapons of mass destruction and Saddam Hussein's intention, and all, all got exposed, total lies. And it was exposed that our government knew it was a lie when they were telling us it and when they were taking us to war. We shouldn't underestimate how that knowledge gained through that process and built on steadily over the years since then has changed the mindset of the people in Britain, in the USA, in all the imperialist countries. We might not have brilliant militant working class organizations and a strong socialist consciousness, but we have all of the tinder ready for the spark to accept socialist analysis from people, if only they would take it to the workers, because their belief in, their faith in democracy, in the state, in politicians, in the media, in the judiciary is just gone, and has been being steadily destroyed. And of course, that is massively exacerbated by the plunge in their living conditions that is, getting worse by the day, in the present conditions. So I think there's a reason, you're right, for crackdowns now, even though there's not a strong organized working class movement. There's definitely the potential for one to arise very quickly as things get worse.
One other thing, Donald Trump, interesting. And what's interesting is to watch. He is the greatest right now in the US, the ruling class, right? Donald Trump is a great horror to them. Now, there is a discussion. Well, my gosh, Donald Trump to some extent is one of them, etc. Right? Okay, true. I think they understand that their system is in crisis, and they see Donald Trump as a guy who doesn't understand the rules of the system. He really believes some of these illusions. So Donald Trump went and said, well, I'll go talk to the North Koreans and shake their hands and we'll get a peace deal there. And then I'll look good because I got a peace deal and do this, blah, blah, blah. He doesn't understand that enmity with the North Koreans, trying to destroy the North Korean socialism, is a fundamental part of this system, right? So while in fact he is one of them, right? Clearly he does things to go after socialism, to go after the left, to do a lot of stuff that they want. Their fear to me is that he doesn't understand the rules, that you can't put him behind the wheel of this thing at a time when it is in crisis, in an acute crisis, and it's so vulnerable right now. The last thing they can afford is to put someone like Donald Trump in charge who doesn't understand the rules. Your thoughts?
It's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, sometimes I wonder why they get so het up when his last presidency made it really clear the president's not actually in charge anyway. But of course, by trying to do things they don't let him do, he helps workers learn that lesson. I'm trying to do things and they won't let me. Oh, you mean who we vote for really doesn't matter? Not even doesn't matter because you're two the same, but even if we vote someone in there who's Karl Marx, he doesn't get to make the decisions, right? So I guess that there's that aspect of a Trump presidency, right? That there's the beginning of a realization for people. It doesn't matter who you put in the White House, right? This is the system is your enemy, not Joe Biden per se, right? Joe Biden is a front man for a class. And, of course, Donald Trump, I find him a horrific personality, and of course, he's, apart from being crass and stupid and wrong about everything, he's anti-communist, he's anti-immigrant. He does the worst type of populism of encouraging workers to blame other workers for their problems, right? Which is, the exact opposite of what we need. But he is a disruptor. You're right. He's a disruptor at a time when the system really can't take any more disruption. And I think what makes him really fundamentally a disruptor is he's a rich guy who hasn't been bought by any of the big monopolies. So he funds himself to get into the White House. He's not funded by some sponsor or some list of sponsors who are going to go, right, Citibank owns you and you will do as you're told. He's not he's not a professional frontman for the system like Obama and, you know, these types who understand the rules of the game. You front up, you do as you're told, you get to feather your nest, you retire nicely, your children will go to the elite schools and buy their way into, you know, the top of the Mandarin class. No, he has a genuine belief in American democracy for the billionaires. And he thinks as a billionaire, he's allowed to have a voice in American democracy. And he hasn't understood he's not big enough anymore. His type of billions are nothing compared to the billions of the people who really run the show, the people he identified himself as the deep state, right? The people who do the fake news, right? He identified these things. He was outraged by them because he, as a good American billionaire, should have equal access to the media and the corridors of power. But his billions aren't enough anymore to make him part of the real ruling elite. So he's like a little guy to them. And he's not controllable because he can pay his own way to the White House. Well, that's a right mess up, isn't it? He's not going to be a good front man. He's going to say the wrong thing. He's going to say, we got the oil. He's going to say, well, I don't really see what's wrong with Vladimir Putin. Why don't we just, you know, what's Russia done to us? You know, he doesn't represent the interests of the 0.0001% who really run the USA, its economy, and, you know, American imperialism in general, who are directing, you know, the war machine, who are directing government policy, who are directing the CIA and all its overseas adventures and all the rest of it. He's not their safe, reliable servant, although he is absolutely an enemy of the working class. So it's a fascinating contradiction to me. And from my perspective, what it says is the fight in the ruling class creates opportunities for workers to learn, for workers to organize, and for workers to develop their own independent policy that is a working class policy. We can't look for our salvation in people like Donald Trump. He's not going to save anything for us. But anything he does to weaken the system, we should be working out how to use that to our advantage.
I think this is the great thing about Donald Trump, and that is, you know, I've heard it said, you know, it's not what happens to you in life that determines the outcome or your future. It's how you react to what happens to you, right? The reactions of the working class to Donald Trump is what's really good. Right now, let's face it, when Barack Obama came in, and people said, you know, to him, hey, wait a minute, George Bush violated these laws, Karl Rove violated these laws, Dick Cheney violated these laws, and there appears more. Can you investigate them? And Obama said, we're going to look forward. We can't look backwards. We're moving forward. We've got, you know, big banks that we've got to look out for, all kinds of things we got to do. Money we've got to transfer to the rich. We can't be trifling with such things as lying an entire country into war. Now, the system says, we've got, how do they put it? The law applies equally to everyone. Trump has violated the law, so we have no alternative but to charge him with like 96 separate charges. And just just a casual overlook of the charges, you can see a lot of them are preposterous. Right. To those of us, there are many of us who say, well, we're no Trump fans, but my God, that's preposterous. You know what I mean? In New York City, you're literally going to charge someone with overvaluing the price of real estate when they when they take out a loan in New York City. Like, that doesn't happen to every single, you know, and in this instance, the lender of record, which was one of the big banks, didn't complain because the loan was paid back. No one in the transaction complained. Everyone made their money, including Trump. And then the government comes back, right there, it looks like you said it was worth $1,000 and it was only worth $999.99. We got you. Those things are opening the eyes. I think those types of obvious contradictions, we can't go after this guy, we got to go after this guy, to me really opens the eyes of the American people to say, hey, wait a minute. We thought we could vote in Trump. And what you're really saying is, nah, this business about you can vote in who you want's not going to work out. We'll let you know who you can vote out, and we'll do this by any means necessary. I think it's again, those of us who I look at Trump the same way as you do, but he is I always say, Trump is a political phenomenon. He didn't come into American politics. He came out of American politics. The dynamic of Trump was created by the dynamics of this system. Anyway, your thoughts on the system going after Trump and how important it is to learn from that.
Absolutely, and you're 100% right, Garland. In their desperate desire to stop Donald Trump running for president, the ruling class of the USA is exposing the system in a myriad ways to the mass of the people right in front of them. It's showing, this lawfare is showing the real nature of bourgeois justice system, which we were all taught that the law is something above classes, above. It's like it came from God, and it's neutral and it's perfect. And if you follow the law, then society works, right? And now we see that the law is an instrument in the hands of one class in its battle to stay in power. And they will use it how they want, and they don't care that the way they use it is contradictory and against how it's supposed to be. And, they don't follow their own rules. The rules that they tell us are for everyone are for the little people. They're for us idiots to obsess over the rules. They don't care about the rules. And they're showing us that. And that's really important because they're helping to undermine the faith of the masses in these rules, the so-called rules that so allegedly keep us safe and keep democracy working and all this rubbish. The rules are there to keep the little guy in his place, and the big people ignore the rules when they get in the way. And that's the truth of it. And these are, our job is to help people see that, to help open their eyes to the nature of the system, and then to connect the fact that they've seen how the system doesn't work to an understanding that it's the system that has to go and not this guy or that guy. And they're showing it with all their types of attacks on Trump. So the media wars, they're showing it there. They've spent 20 years, and now with Trump, it's gone into overdrive, undermining the credibility of the media with the mass of the working class. And increasingly, ordinary people are turning their backs on corporate media. They're in a total crisis, inability to hold on to they push their narratives like crazy. But the number of people who are still buying them, who are still even paying any attention, is shrinking by the day. We already talked about how they undermined the credibility of the White House itself as an institution by having Donald Trump in there and showing that if he made decisions that the deep state, the state machinery did not approve of, they were not going to get enacted, right? So what is the White House exactly? What is the Congress, right? What is the House of Representatives? What are all these institutions? Actually, people are learning these really important lessons from all of this. And I think the job, as I say, of people like me and you is to bring those lessons home to people and start to show them the way towards the real solution.
Last, I know we're busy. Do you have time for one more question? Sure. Okay. The conflict in, the assault on Gaza, the assault on the Palestinians in a similar manner. We learned a lot. We're learning a lot. As it's tragic, it's terrible, certainly, but people are learning a lot from this. One of the things I've said is, people are like, isn't this terrible? And I say, yes, in a really terrible way. There are a lot of us who are looking at it saying, we told you so. I'm looking at it because people are like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. And I say, how many people they killed in Iraq, in Libya? Read a book called The Jakarta Method. Do you know anything about Salvador Allende? I could go on and on and on. And I say, the thing that's going on here is this is small potatoes as far as an imperialist. And it's horrifying to say this. This is the truth. And I've said this to people. When it comes to the imperialist, the decadent murders and genocides, this is small. The numbers in Iraq. I mean, I could go do 2.5 million in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia bombing. The numbers are incredible. But now that there's Telegram and Twitter and people on a day-to-day basis, and this is the really good thing, the resistance forces have learned how to use pictures and video and get the information out on a day-to-day basis. Your thoughts on what people are able to learn and the dynamic, the resistance forces in Yemen demonstrating that you can fight City Hall. demonstrating that you can fight these superpower imperialists, and there's nothing they can do if you stand up against them. Your thoughts on what we are learning from this tragic conflict?
You know, you're 100% right, Garland, in terms of, you know, just like the Zionists have tried to describe the Holocaust of European Jews in World War II as the Holocaust with capital T, capital H, the only one that ever happened, when in fact it was one in an endless string. You know, since the dawn of colonial times, capitalism has been soaked in, drenched in blood, and imperialism has never known a day where it wasn't committing a genocide somewhere. That is a horrible truth. Most of them, the mass of the people in the West don't even know about. You know, how many British people know that millions of Indians in Bengal died in a famine that was essentially engineered by British wartime policies? And at the time it was happening, the British administration refused famine relief, kind of saw it like it was, although it had come about because of British policy, saw it as a kind of, oh, well, it's just a rebalancing of the population. Churchill made a comment where he basically said, I hate Indians. They're filthy and disgusting. They breed like rabbits. It's better if there's fewer of them. You know, no, we're not sending any ships to, we're not diverting any ships to send them food. We need it elsewhere. And just let millions of Indians die. Didn't give a SHIT, right? And this is the mindset of the colonizers. The thing is, they've been in a position where they dominated the information space so that most of the people of the world who weren't involved in those things didn't know about them. The only way they found out was through a communist press. If you have a good daily communist newspaper in your country, you'll get information about things that otherwise you won't hear about. That was the only way workers knew things. Now, we have social media. And although you have to work out how to find things on social media, once you've worked it out, you can't be turned off it. They might have got control of the algorithms on Twitter and YouTube and Facebook to try to cut down our exposure to true information. But if you've built a network of personal friends on WhatsApp, or if you've joined Telegram and you've found some channels where useful information is coming, they can't get into that. They can't stop it. And that is what is really doing for them, actually, in terms of the information domination. And that is why we're seeing with Gaza, you know, you have to see that the most recent assault and escalation of the genocide in Palestine, the reason it's falling on such fertile ground in terms of the numbers of people who are tuned in and watching and paying attention is because it's not new. The genocide is 75 years old, 76 now. And each time there's been a ramping up of the genocidal assault on the Palestinian people, a slightly wider circle of people has become aware of it and started to be plugged in and started to inform itself about why is this happening. And for decades, that number has been steadily growing and becoming steadily better informed about what it's really all about. And just because the situation gets normalized for a few years, and Anthony Blinken can say, Middle East is the most peaceful it's ever been for 20 years, you know, it's gone quiet, as in, you know, there's a temporary cessation of the most overt level of hostilities. That's their level of quiet. They're still genociding the Palestinians quietly away from headlines, right? It's not being reported. But with the latest assault on Gaza, where the Israelis, because of the logic of their own situation, have gone so full throttle, rampant, openly, publicly genocidal and vicious, and conducted this insane blitzkrieg on Gaza to wipe it off the map, as they have said, 2.5 million people they want to just eradicate somehow. That has been received by an audience that was already tuned in and waiting and watching. It didn't come out of nowhere. You know, do you know, Garland, where I first opened social media accounts in a meaningful way was when I traveled to Gaza as part of a convoy aimed at breaking the siege back in 2009. That's why my handle on lots of media is Jyoti2Gaza, right? That's why I called that on Twitter. I got my Facebook, my Twitter. I had an Instagram then, or whatever. I had a blog to document this struggle, which I felt was coming to a head. I couldn't believe that the siege of Gaza was going to last much longer. It had already been going for 3 years. We saw Operation Cast Lead, and then we saw 2008 when this big bombing campaign on Gaza. And then after that bombing campaign, they weren't allowed any materials to rebuild anything, and it was horrific and disgusting. And we said, if we just target enough pressure on Palestine now, the siege will be broken, and Israel will be forced to the negotiating table. The Americans will be forced to have to negotiate a lasting, just solution for the Palestinian people. It didn't happen then, but that doesn't mean that everything went away. All of those people over all of those years have been getting more and more tuned in, and the growth of cynicism towards the system is also feeding into that. So you're seeing many currents, come to a head. And the fact that, as you said, the resistance forces have learned to use social media, and there are many, many more people who are looking at alternative sources of social media than there ever were before. So they're not just relying on Facebook now. Huge numbers of people have moved to Telegram and have found good sources on Telegram, and the resistance forces know that too. There are certain accounts on TikTok, on Instagram, and there are these WhatsApp groups where people just send things, and they travel around the world very, very fast. And these are informal networks just of people, that the state has no way of clamping down on, really. And the fact that that's all happening in real time in front of the eyes of a population whose level of faith in the imperialist politicians and media has been fatally undermined, I think that's what's making this real tipping point. And what we see with these deaths, as horrific as they are in Palestine now, is they're qualitatively different than the deaths of all the Palestinians who went before, because now the world is watching and not looking away. Whereas before, many, many thousands of Palestinians have been murdered in the last 75 years as part of the same Zionist project. And the world said, oh dear, and looked away, and believed in the assurances of Israeli politicians and American politicians and British politicians that we're doing our best, and it's a difficult situation, and of course we care about the Palestinians, and we don't like bloodshed, and Israel, Palestine, isn't it complicated? All of that the faith in the words and the motivations of our media and our politicians has been shattered. And now when they try to subdue us with these lies, it doesn't work.
My mic didn't work there for a second. I didn't have it. I had it muted. Well, thank you very much, Jody. Tell everyone where they can find you online and your organization.
So if it's just me, you can just search for Jyoti Bra on Telegram. I have a channel there. And if you also go on Telegram and search for The Communists, you will find my party's channel. Our website URL is there, thecommunists.org. We have a YouTube channel called Proletarian TV. And I think our Twitter is @CPGBML.
And how? Real quick, a couple minutes. How are the members of your party doing? Anything going on there that were arrested with the whole booklet censorship thing?
They're all fine. We are waiting. So we've got various dates in February and March when different people have to present at the police station to find out whether or not they're going to be pressed with any charges. At the moment, we've heard nothing.
Okay. Well, one thing we didn't have to get a chance to talk about, what we will next week, and that is, the U.S. soldiers dying, the U.S. empire saying, doggone it, we're going to strike back and we're going to hit you hard and we're going to go after Iran. And then a day going by, and now a week's gone by, and they're reticent to act, and we can discuss why. At any rate, Jody, thank you very much. And I look forward to having you back soon. I'm going to send your dad a request. I'd like to get him on. I'd actually like to talk about what the British Empire did to India. I was reading the other day, and I saw where it's now estimated that between the 1700s and when India finally got its what we'll call freedom, roughly $152 trillion was stolen from India, amongst all the other terrible things. But I'd like to get your dad on to talk about that whole history, and particularly in light of what we were just discussing, that what we're told is there's but one Holocaust that needs to be addressed. And I'd like for people to find out and hear about what the what the British Empire did to India, because the people in the West have no clue. They have no it, for obvious reasons. It's been well hidden. So I will send your dad a request and see if he can come on and have that discussion. Thank you very much, Jody Bryan. Look forward. Hopefully, if your schedule is open next week, next Friday, you'll be able to come back. But we'll keep in touch and see how that works out. Thanks a lot, everyone. As you know, I've for obvious reason, I've been thrown off of Twitter. So please make sure you share this on all of your social media platforms, and you hit the like button so perhaps we can defeat the evil algorithm. Thank you.